Hey guys, so in this episode of the podcast, this is going to be somewhat chill and loose. This will be another solo episode. There'll be loads of these, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a topic. I'm going to talk about getting the advantage, and I'm going to talk about how that kind of fits in basically that like one question basically is the birth of almost all of my content and my philosophy in many different ways. So we'll get into that. But first, just a little bit of backstory. Um, you're probably wondering what the hell is going on with me, my content, and just all the random backdrops and stuff. Currently I'm in a hotel in Mexico because I'm doing that quarantine to get back into the States, as I was previously in a travel ban country. Traveling with COVID is complicated. So despite having an O1 visa and being able to legally work and live in the States, there is still some things that you don't get unless you're a citizen, which is entry from a travel ban country. So I'm in Mexico right now and trying to make the best of it, really catching up on a lot of work, and trying to focus on the important things. So with that out of the way, I wanted to, as I said, kind of do a lot of these more loose kind of like jam sessions where I just talk about some ideas, and maybe you guys like that and maybe you don't. But today's idea is very important. It's called Getting the Advantage. And I actually thought about making this into a series many times, but there's so much to it. And then I realized that actually all of my content basically comes from this one core idea of getting the advantage, because ultimately getting the advantage in my context is the context of competition. And the thing that's been most impactful in my life has been competition, because it's, for me, been one of the best drivers of fulfillment and self-improvement. And for me, life is about growth. So then you can see that this is the most important thing in that sense to my development as a person over the many years that I've been on this planet. And as someone with a background that was a little bit difficult growing up, competition really saved me. It helped to give me self-esteem because I was able to work hard at something and I was able to see results. And it was also able to help show me a lot of things about myself that I didn't like and I had to fix. It was humbling in that respect. And that's another great thing about competition is it's you have to be very confident, but you have to also take the knocks too. You have to be realistic. So yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about getting the advantage, and I have a really cool article out about this, which I wrote because I wanted to kind of help set the language a little bit in Valorant, because it's a new and growing game with a lot of new eyes and players. And I felt like with my experience, I could start to do more kind of writing and to try to put more things or put more language out there to help us kind of unify on what is what and what means what. Because generally speaking, language is one of the most important things to drive an understanding forward in anything. Linguistic tools are very important. So what I did was I made this article, which was about first principles in tactical FPS. How do we think about it? And it just stems from in competition, what is most important? Well, it's getting the advantage. And getting the advantage, I mean, I can just talk a lot about this one thing very specifically for a long time, because let's just look at one really ridiculous example, right, of getting the advantage, because the whole point is that we get the advantage as much as we possibly can, but no result is ever guaranteed. And the reason is because if you insert human beings in there, very complex, unpredictable creatures that are very nuanced, you're never going to get like a surefire win every single time, no matter how many advantages you have, no matter how much you stack the deck in your favor. But if you do that, then statistically over time, you will have better and better results. So that is, of course, the name of the game, but you can't guarantee it. So, I think this is really fun because even if, let's say, you have machines, right? Machines that start to get more and more complex, well, they're probably coded by human beings, and then the code is probably imperfect in some senses. The more complex the system, possibly. I don't know. But I was thinking of saying, machines would get it right. But then I was like, well, if we're coding them, then you're still inserting the human dynamic. I mean, that's kind of the beauty about human beings, is that we're flawed in that respect, in that we have to consistently, face those flaws and work on them. And it's those flaws that drive us to constantly evolve and improve. And in those flaws, often is beauty, often is happy accidents. Like bunny hopping, for example, is one of the happiest accidents that ever happened in competitive gaming. It was a total accident from the Quake engine, but I'm already digressing from the original point. So I wanted to make a really funny little scenario here. So imagine you've got two people. We've set up two guys in a competition in the gym, and they both have identical strength. So their central nervous system and their physiology in terms of like their just strength, what their muscle, the capacity and density of their muscles, and the distribution of muscle fibers and all of that sciencey jazz. That's totally equal, let's say. But let's say, and the competition is that they have to get to 100 reps as quickly as possible with a weight. I'm not going to say the movement because then we'll just get too far into the weeds. But they have to get to 100 reps as quickly as possible. Now, let's say, for argument's sake, that one of them has 15 kilograms to lift, and the other one has 10 kilograms to lift. Logic would state, we would assume that the person who is lifting 10 kilograms will get to 100 more quickly because they've got identical strength, and he'll be able to lift the weight much more quickly, and his muscles will get less tired. And, it seems kind of obvious. But in reality, that's not necessarily the case, because there's many factors, because they're human beings, that actually make it such that maybe it won't be the case that the guy that's got less weight actually wins, because maybe the guy that's got more weight has a better mental game approach. He's got a better psychology. He's got more grit and determination. He's got more hunger to win, and he's able to actually get more strength out of his body than the other guy can. Or maybe it's the fact that the other guy is the opposite. Maybe that guy's a bit of a defeatist. Maybe he doesn't believe in himself. Maybe he's been having some bad results lately. Or maybe it's the case that the guy with more weight understands the technique better. So he's using his muscles and he's doing the movement patterns in a way that's more efficient. So the effective weight that he's lifting is technically lower, which makes the gap more even. Maybe it's the case that he understands, from like more of a different sense, like the best approach in terms of the tempo for the lift, because he understands how the endurance and stamina elements work better. There starts to become a lot of nuance that goes beyond something that is as simple as just the strength and the numbers, because human beings. And this is why it's so fascinating, right? This is why all of my content is derived from this idea of how do we get the advantage? Because when we look at competition, there's so many different things that you can do to try to get edges for your game, to get better and better, which is why it's so fascinating. I'm so obsessed by it. For example, it could be the mental game. And I do tend to try to focus a bit more on areas that are less talked about or less understood, generally speaking, because I feel like there's more value there than to be distributed. And because, the other stuff is more out there. I think that's pretty straightforward. But ultimately, all of it is really interesting to me. And experimenting, being a human guinea pig and trying everything out is really interesting to me. So, sports psychology, the mental game, hugely important for me. And I'll talk a lot about that. And that's a critical element of getting the advantage. I think that's the biggest leak I think that is most commonly the biggest leak that people have. And I'll always recommend Jared Tendler's most recent book. I read it and it's fantastic. And I might do an episode again that's just simply about that. I wrote an article where I kind of took some of his ideas from that book and kind of related them to my own personal experiences in competition, and kind of reflected on what his book taught me about those experiences, which is really interesting. Regardless, so we've got the sports psychology, but what about nutrition and the physiology, or something like supplements and nootropics? How do we optimize our cognition? How much of a difference does it make when it comes to having good routines around sleep and water, hydration and consumption? How important is it in your training regimen, like that you have certain hours, like how long should you be training, and how should the training be spread out? How much training do you need on mechanics, really? How should you actually program yourself? How should you interact with your teammates? How should you look at your focus? How should you generate an awareness for your energy levels and how that impacts your gameplay? How should you think about coding your intuition system? Because our intuition systems, that's where the performance, that's where the decision making comes from, and that's where our performance comes from and our execution comes from, is our intuition systems. So how can we prevent bad habits and bad patterns? And how can we prevent getting stuck? How can we improve our decision making long term? How can we stay on top of metas? How can we predict the next metas? How can we be in a place to optimize our mechanics and our setup? How can we understand our preferences better, based on our physiology? Do we have certain preferences because our body is a certain, certain dimensions and lengths and widths. So is it the case that with certain sized hands, I would prefer certain mice, grips, pads, frictions, and how does that relate to the kinds of spots I'll be playing in the specific game I'm playing, and the kinds of mouse control movements that are required in the game I'm playing, because each game's going to be different. So there's all these elements that all factor in together to constitute a player. So when you think about all of that, it's really exciting, because really, if you're really fulfilled by the journey of improving yourself as a player, then you're then going on that journey is amazing. There's so much to take from it. You can learn so much about it. And that's where all my content basically comes from, and a lot of my conversations on my podcast will come from this place as well, in discussing a lot of these ideas, and going to people like Jared Tendler, or going to people like Taylor Johnson, who's a sports performance coach, or going to players and seeing how do they apply these things, how do they approach these various ideas, and what tribulations and trials do they go through. What is it like to be in a slump and to be in the worst place in your career? And how do you get out of that? What is it like to be someone that's on top of the world? What is it like to be the best and to have people chasing you, and for you to no longer be chasing somebody else? There's so many different elements to all of that. And there's an even another big area that I really want to explore pretty heavily, because that's also a big deal. Let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about coaching. What constitutes a good coach? Honestly, I think that we don't have any standards for these things in esports at the present time. I think that we have a lot of coaches that probably don't have a lot of the skill sets that maybe they should have. There's going to be a lot of great coaches that are really great at certain aspects of coaching, but they don't have the support in the other areas. There'll be great coaches that are more well-rounded. There's going to be players that don't have the correct discipline or the correct outlook on how they function in their team and how they function with the whole structure within their team. There's going to be management issues in various teams where the management will hinder the ability for the players and the coach to do their jobs correctly. There's a lot of elements that really factor in when we're talking about performance, end of day performance, end of match performance, what happened in the game. So I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about. And so this little kind of rant of mine is really just a bit of a look into kind of how I kind of see a lot of these things, and what I'll do with this podcast in particular, as well as I'll encourage all of you listening who are interested by these ideas and concepts. If anyone in particular is going to jump out at you, please hit me up on Twitter, send me a tweet at me, or hit me up in the Discord or on my Twitch channel if I'm live, or on the YouTube comments, or really wherever you want to. And reach out and let me know what you think would be really interesting to talk about, especially in some of these solo episodes, which are easier for me to come by, because I don't have to set up a guest or necessarily get help from Luke or Zilf, who's been so great to really help out on the channel to do the more elaborate episodes, but I can do this a bit more free, willy-nilly. So thank you for listening, and there'll be many more like this, so I hope to see you on the next one. Cheers.